Welcome to Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balzerzak. Each episode will explore the passions, expertise, and real-world experiences of security leaders who are helping the future of data security and governance. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To learn more about our AI-powered data security platform, please visit centra.io. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Guardians of the Data. My guest today has over 20 years of experience across multiple industries. He's got a number of publications out, including a CISO's Playbook for Data Protection on Dark Reading. Currently the Senior Manager of Data Protection and Product Strategy in the automotive industry, Areejit Banerjee. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Ward. Pleasure being on your show. Thank you for having me.
Ready to get into it?
Yes, I am.
All right. In your professional opinion, what is the biggest data security challenge organizations are facing?
Great question. The biggest challenge is the preservation of data integrity, in my opinion, in the age of artificial intelligence. As we exhaust the organic data that we have collected over the last 3 to 4 decades, we risk training the future AI with biased data. And our organic data collection already had a lack of representation from the global south, from the emerging economies. I think as we move forward, that poses a real risk in terms of data security and protection.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, we certainly, this is a problem folks have talked about for a while, right? Biased data, making sure your AI models are unbiased. But interesting take with your answer, right? As we train, have more synthetic data, we could accidentally, bring in more bias even. So what do we do? Any thoughts, any tips or tricks of what folks may do to, hopefully not go that route with your AI models?
Reflect upon what I said. If you consider from the 1990s, we started this journey of data explosion, starting with floppy CDs and then onto the cloud, where we really had the explosion of data. We've been collecting data ever since and growing. I'm in the Northern Virginia area. This is the data center of the world. And if you come here, you would see across every road, there are these massive buildings with huge infrastructure collecting data. As we progressed on that journey, midway, we encountered something called the Brussels effect. That's where the GDPR comes into practice. From the European Union, the Brussels effect, where they exported regulation. The General Data Protection Regulation is what came as the first guardrails to this massive data collection that was going on. We were about to stabilize there, and we had our breakthrough moment. Let's call it the Sputnik moment of 2022, where you have ChatGPT and you have AI use that data that we've been collecting for so long and started training on that data. Come today, few years later, we have run out of organic data that was or we are about to run out of the organic data that we were collecting, the human-generated data. So all the nuances that the organic data collection had is just about to get amplified now, because we are now producing synthetic data on top of that organic data, so that we can train these large language models. So there lies the problem of data security, where we build our AI foundation on an already biased data infrastructure, and we now amplify it by producing and generating more synthetic data on top. So that's really a problem that we are facing.
Compounding issues. Compounding, right? Data on top of data, yeah.
Exactly. You did not have representation of the Republic of Congo, of Indonesia, as much as you had United States. You did not have representation of Bangladesh as you had representation of Spain or Germany or in other parts of Europe. So this is the marginalization of the human society. One part of the society being the winners, and the other part of the society being the losers in this equation. And you asked, what do we do? Right? That's a really important question as we look into the future. And the truth is, we have three perspectives in play right now. We don't have a unified global answer. We have frameworks, but there are three perspectives that are material and in play in the world right now. You have the innovate first approach, where US really does it good, innovate first, regulate after. In the European Union, we say regulate first, because that's important. Human rights is important. And then you have the third perspective, which is the Chinese perspective, where the state controls the data. The data that you collect is for the state to gain more control over its people. Those are the three perspectives at play. Which is the winner? It's time to say. I personally lean towards the European perspective. It comes at its expenses. If you look at the world right now, the big techs of the world, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, name it, it's all United States. If you regulate first, you do get some. You have SAP, or probably Spotify, a few of these companies coming from the European Union. But the breakthrough and the technological marvel of the world is United States. Chinese model is something that is in direct contrast to the democratic values that we believe in and we live in. But then they still produce, TikTok and Alibaba and WeChat, etc. But it does not resonate with the Western democratic systems. There is a beautiful reference that I would like your audience to reference is the book by Ani Radford, on the divide of the digital economies. It perfectly synthesizes this exact message that I'm talking about, where you have three perspectives at play in the world. However, if you look at the world ahead, there are thinkers, and I particularly lean towards Jeffrey Hinton, who's called the godfather of modern AI, where he talks about in a philosophical way, the mother AI. There is a version of that which can be imbibed in development of products, which we could obviously get into, where he says AI system that is built to optimize human values of kindness, of caring for others, is the way forward in terms of data security and preservation as we go towards artificial general intelligence. Who knows, artificial super intelligence someday.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still playing back in my head the piling of data, right? Again, to your point, you have so much human generated data. And I think we'd all like to think like we're producing a lot of data, but it's kind of a pebble in the ocean, right? At the end of the day, especially where we're going, where we now have generative AI, other forms of AI that are outpacing us, right? Like they're made to kind of outpace us with regard to generation of data. But what were they generating off of? Human data, which could have bias. And then again, something I haven't thought of, the bigger pool of data is going to be AI generated. And what happens if that's extremely biased at the end of the day? Does it just get worse from an output perspective?
Right? There are technical perspectives, there are technical ways in which you currently deal with that, right? If you do an exploratory data analysis, which you would do for, even for machine learning model development, you are looking at the composition of the data, but that is a very statistical approach to the data. If the uniqueness of an individual is not preserved or is not in the majority, that is treated as an outlier. You are also imputing data to prep the data to develop your model. if you look at computer vision problems, you are using, different techniques, smoke and whatnot, to generate and replicate more of the existing data. And is your data comprehensive of the population? No, you're already sampling. And is the sample a correct representation? No. On top of that, you are putting synthetic data. I mean, I wouldn't just artificially generated data from, the new age tools like Sora and whatnot is one side of the problem. The other problem is where you are actually engineering the data with which you're building a for purpose model, and it has an inherent bias. And that example isn't rare. Like if you look at the current landscape in the United States, where we are innovating at faster than ever, we are deregulating to innovate. You have these problems where people from zip codes, certain zip codes, do not get um, or home loans because they happen to be from a certain zip code, or a certain section of the society gets um, more frequently flagged as potential for crime because they happen to be from a certain background or certain characteristics. These are the inherent biases that currently exist in our data, and that gets amplified. We already spoke about. Like the guardrails, we once again go back to that question. What do we do? If you think about it, right, there are three pillars with which you can approach this problem. From a cybersecurity professional perspective, a person operating in the field um, and building a product that he or she is trying to ship, what do you do? It's basically across three pillars. I personally operate on the data protection and data security against AI scraping. So I could speak more from that background. And I think three pillars that I work on is number one, the technical defense. When you are doing your modeling, ensure that you're doing enough rigor in your exploratory data analysis, data preparation, normalizing your data so that you can reduce as much bias as you can with your data. That's your technical front. And, if you look at the bot problem, leverage players who are offering out of the box solutions to enhance your bot scraping issues. That's one. That's your first technical defense layer. The second layer that you got to imbibe and use in delivering data protection is the product design. For every product that you design, you have to have an AI impact assessment built in. In my work, I have demonstrated how you can use, if you reference my article on HackerNote, where I talk about why every product manager should do an impact assessment and the frameworks that you can use for impact assessment. Microsoft has a framework. National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has a framework. You might have to do a combination of these, but you got to take a framework to do an assessment of is your product biased towards one or the other. And then the third pillar on which you have to base your cyber security or data protection or data security approach is you have to look at the public policy. I wrote a policy brief with the specific area of work that I am engaged in right now, which is with anti-scraping, which is a big problem right now with the advent of AI. Right, so you have numerous cases which I've made reference of in my in my op-ed at Corporate Compliance Insight. The $2 billion industry that the scraping market has created for itself is projected to become 2 billion by 2030. Right now, it sits at about $1.3 billion.
It's crazy. It's crazy to think about.
Right, and you got these huge players there, and it's destroying the ecosystem on which we developed our AI infrastructure. You had these data providers who were collecting data from various sources, um, you know, persisting that data, making that data into information and into inferences that people could use to make life-changing decisions. That erosion, that data, that infrastructure is getting eroded because there was a decision where LinkedIn and Haiku Labs had a court case where the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was being used for data protection before that, but since the Haiku versus LinkedIn case, that arsenal, that tool was taken away. Now, if you have public data, anybody can come and scrape. So these kind of um, policy changes weakens the current infrastructure. And I think the third pillar is where I'm also doing a lot of work. I've submitted a policy brief to the Office of Science and Technology Policy, the White House. I've published a policy brief on my on SSRN, where my policy brief is available to understand what kind of changes do we need to do to the trade secret law, to the definition of data misappropriation, to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, in order to empower and modernize all of these tools that we have for a future where we can deliver data protection and data security. So it's a three-legged stool.
I think that's very, very interesting point you just made. I've had a lot of conversations lately around, modernizing technology and thinking and practices from a corporate perspective, right? Tooling and security and all that, certainly important, right? Because technology's outpacing what we're doing. The business wants to run at the speed of light with the technology. The point that we haven't really talked about, or I haven't had in a lot of conversations, is where you're going, which is we got to have updates to our rules, regulations, and laws to keep up as well, because they were made in a day and age where AI was not as prolific. It was around in patches, right? AI has been around for quite some time now, or flavors of it, but not to the levels they are today.
Yeah, absolutely. AI is more potent than it has ever been. It is a general form technology. It's not a narrow technology. It is to affect all walks of life, all forms of other technological progress that we are making in every discipline of science. And now, art and creativity is going to affect everywhere. If we use the same rule book that we had before, we are lagging, and we are waiting from a catastrophe to happen. So yeah, the policy pillar is extremely important, as it is the product design pillar, as is the technology pillar. There is so whenever we think of cybersecurity, we kind of go on a tunnel vision of, okay, what's the next technological breakthrough that we have to do? But like I put out in my corporate compliance insight publication, it's a $2 billion industry that you are competing against. You are against an arms race. If you are a banking or a financial services institution, do you really want to engage in that arms race, or do you want to leverage the two other pillars that is at play? Do you want to be morally responsible and thereby earn customer trust by using the NIST AIRMF framework, by adopting the Microsoft's responsible AI framework, by adhering to the European Union's AI Act, which is going to be, in its final version in August 2026, where you are a global player, you uphold the human values as you build products and bring AI services to the market. I think that is a critical piece, as much as it is important to constantly engage on the policy front, and and try and help modernize the policy front. I'm working on the technology side as well. I have published an article on Hacker Note, which I mentioned about the layered defense, how a data-rich organization can preserve its worth by adopting this layered architecture. That is one. And then I'm also engaged with OWASP, the threat automation team, where I'm redefining modernization is required at all levels, even on the technology layer. The playbooks that companies always follow, OWASP standards for identifying risk, the ontology of threat. How is what is scraping? What is SMS pumping? So I'm working with them. And I'm a contributor on that project to define the ontology of threat in the modern in the era. The countermeasures that you had from before AI is no more relevant. The OWASP guide tells you the countermeasures. I'm rewriting the countermeasures. You can have the version 1.3 is going to be out pretty soon. Probably by the second quarter, we're going to have a book out for companies to adopt the new defined standards for OWASP. I think that is a critical piece that's required on the technology side, along with the other areas that I'm working on the product design, on the policy side.
So kind of coming back to, I mean, as you know, right, you are very versed in this space for sure, given, all the publications you put out, all the information you have. For the organizations that are starting to build out some of their own AI models and maybe don't have that level of knowledge just yet, in your opinion, what would be the first couple of things they should really figure out or define from a data security perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're a new organization, or if you have been an organization that has now found a new reason to be more careful with its own data, the problem is the same in a new or old. It's the same. And I did publish a new article on the playbook for a CISO on it. It is a dark reading. You can reference it. It's a 3-step process. So the first step is to set a strategic mandate for the entire organization, a team of 10 or a team of 10,000. You got to state the mission. What is the mission of your data security? Why do you want to do it? Is there a financial value associated with doing? If you don't define that, your board is not going to come on board. If you have an advisory board or a board of directors or a venture capitalist, trying to fund you, you would be looked at as a speed bump. You've got to have your financial success matrix defined when you set your mission. You got to, another very important piece in your mission statement has to be, why does a customer care for your security initiative? If you cannot translate what it means in terms of value for a customer, and if you only say this is for the protection, it fundamentally erodes your value proposition in terms of the security position that you have to put forward in front of your board, in front of all the people who have to come on board in your journey of protecting your organization. So that's number one, which is stating the mission and ensuring that you are appealing to your board, you're stating the mission clearly. You are associating customer value in your mission. Why is it important? The next step that I detail in my article as well is to map your scraping landscape. This is a very important piece in the puzzle, because if your legal team does not understand what your technology teams talk about, or if your product team, while engaging with technology team, does not understand what exact risk are they talking about, you are playing different battles at different grounds. That's hard war to win. So you got to adopt the standard, which is where I am operating also, as the OWASP automated threat standards for defining what threat really means. Okay, what is scraping? What is scalping? What is SMS pumping? Well, a common ontology, a common definition for all the scripts is there's all the threats is what you should first adopt, so that the company speaks the same language. The next very important thing is you cannot define or defend a website. If you go for your entire ecosystem defense, one size does not fit all. So what you should do, or you have to do, is identify the data lineage and at each node, what is the value of the data that you are giving out and what is the protection for that value. If you are giving a commodity level data, which is omnipresent, it just enriches the service that you are offering, but it's omnipresent. You do not need to defend a proprietary intellectual product that you have created, which is your unique value proposition. You could always use commodity data to entice your customers to come and then have your proprietary data in a more defensive posture. That is very important. When you map your threat landscape, to define what data is of higher risk, lower risk, and define and adjust and regulate your protection according to the threat of the data. Finally, you got to map your defense and countermeasure. Like I mentioned, if it's high value, protect more, whereas low commodity level data, you got to keep more tools in your arsenal to fend, win that battle. But then, if you wanted to do everything that you have to do in order to make your organization more secure, preserving the value proposition, you would have a huge backlog of work and you would never have enough resources to achieve it. There is where you got to balance, what is tactical, what is strategic, what do I do on day zero, what do I do on day one? What is it that I have to do in order to fundamentally change the security position of my organization? So you have a tactical playbook, which is maybe you onboard a vendor who offers AI-enabled identification of human against bot attack. And at a strategic level, you identify what high-value data assets should encounter a paywall before a customer comes to see it. So that's where the layered defense framework also comes into play, where I say, create a pyramid of defense. That's your layer one. Identify what business values do I need to protect. Do that protection first. And then identify your customers. A customer who is known from his behavior that he's a buyer of your services is probably to be given less friction than a customer who's still browsing. You probably want to feed your data flywheel with more information about that customer, as opposed to giving him a free path to purchase your services. So these are your strategic moves that you play on. So that's my playbook.
Love it. Really, really good playbook. Well, it's very clear that you've been doing this for a bit, right? Just a time or two, just a few years. I mean, you've been in the industry for over 20 years at this point across multiple industries. So what was your path? How did you get here? How did you get to being a senior manager of data protection?
Well, it's been a long journey, as you mentioned, a tiny bit, 20 years. So, I mean, in chronological sequence, it was investment banking, with banking and financial services, then into data analysis, data protection, then into artificial intelligence, and then finally at the adversarial AI and human at the loop concepts and ethical AI and responsible AI development. That's really been the journey. I've been, I think, mid-career, about 5 to 10 years into my career, is where I got into the story of data, and it stuck to me. I traversed on that path from the business acumen that I had from my previous work as a business analyst, and then when I brought that into data, it just made more sense. And then I've been working on that journey and building on it. I've been, learning and engaging deeply at more thought-provoking and transformational subjects of research. Been reading and just getting more inquisitive. So if I had to say how did I land upon this, it would be inquisitiveness and putting one foot in front of the other, and getting amazed and excited with the new challenges that it brings.
Oh, that's amazing. So, again, you've been in your career for about 20 years. If you could go back in time, maybe at that 5-year mark, we'll use the 5-year mark. So if you can go back to where you were at 5 years into career, is there any advice you'd give yourself? Any paths that you might have taken differently?
That's a tough one. Advice for a person who is right at the 5th year mark. That I think in retrospect, I would say I would worry less. I would worry less about what comes next. I would try to find what is it that the person sitting, maybe next to me or 5,000 miles away from me, um, finds uniquely interesting about this specific work that I'm engaged in. And what is it that I'm missing? It took me time to realize the value of my work until I, turned the page and looked deeper inside. I think it's retrospection at the end of the day that is my job paying my bills, or is my job enriching and the inner inquisitiveness and passion that makes me go to the job tomorrow. There's always that component of work, which is like I will work to pay my bills. And there is that other component, which is looking at the bigger picture. You know, I wrote a requirement document. So what? I wrote a requirement document. But when you look down and see what kind of impact, when I was working in World Bank, we were a team of 20, 25 people working on a project. I always said it is very important to connect what you just did. Maybe you wrote a SQL code, but it's very important to connect that SQL code to the mission of World, which is to eradicate poverty from the face of the world. Did you contribute with the mission of eradicating all people who earn less than $2 from the face of the world? That's a very powerful message to resonate to. And I think everyone at the 5th year, 10th year, 20th years mark, if you can understand how your contribution moves the needle for the larger objective of the organization, whatever mission that you're working for, it's hugely empowering. That transitions your work and what you do from, paying the bills to making a difference in the world.
Very well said. I like that a lot. I think, from a leadership perspective, I think a lot of folks here in, town halls, one-on-ones, whatever, like, here's what you're doing, here's how it contributes back to the mission statement. But I don't know that a lot of folks, like you're describing at least, kind of sit back and say, okay, I did this thing. Now, how did that thing actually relate to the overall vision, and what is that actually doing? I think that's a really good way to actually get some fulfillment in your day instead of just, hey, I got a paycheck.
I mean, it's a two-way road. I did a program with Cornell University on communication. There is a method of communication which is actually three parts: ethos, pathos, logos, right? So where when you are making a communication, you got to make an emotional appeal to the individual. You got to have credibility in what you're saying, and then you got to say the value and the impact that it does. So that's the framework. I think it's a two-way road. Why did I mention about that? Is because when as a leader you are communicating, you got to have these three in your communication. You got to make the mission relatable for your people. You got to translate the mission to tangible facts for the people, your audience, and then you got to establish credibility. Don't consider sold just because it is being said. You got to have the value proposition, the data always embedded in your message. So that's the leadership front. Where then I, as a leader trying to communicate something, you've got to adopt that model. At the same time, when I am a listener, very important part of communication is to be able to listen. When you are a listener, are you resonating with that objective what does my work do to the overall mission? How does this, a Python script that I wrote, or this test case that I built relate to the mission that I'm working for? This is a two-way road. I think it's from my perspective that I'm at the fifth year mark. That is what I was searching for. I would say I'm grateful to all the people who could communicate in that particular way where I could resonate to that mission. So that's where when you come at the 20th years mark, you got to be, retrospective of what shaped your journey and then be able to communicate the same way. To be able to say, how does everyone's work relate to the mission?
I like that. I like that. Well, certainly, you mentioned it a few times. I mentioned it as well. You are producing a lot of content. You got a lot of publications out there. If folks want to find, something of the stuff that you got out there, maybe follow you, connect with you. What's the best way to do so?
Yeah, LinkedIn is always the best way. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. If you don't get a response within a day, you'll surely get within a week. And then I'm also indexed on Google, so you can search for me in Google, and you could always reach out to me on any of my publications. And I'm available. Reach out to me. I would love to hear more. Connect with me. I would love to engage with you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Areejit, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great episode.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And big thank you to the audience. Really hope you enjoyed the episode today and learned something. Please tell others in your network to follow and listen. This has been another exciting episode of Guardians of the Data. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Guardians of the Data. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes and more, visit guardiansofthedata.show. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To see how we help organizations discover and classify all of their data accurately and automatically while quickly achieving petabyte scale data protection without the fuss, please visit centra.io. Catch you next time.